Good evening. I'm Bernadette Glover, pastor of St. Paul Baptist Church, Montclair, New Jersey. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for a compelling conversation around reparations and the politics of Black regret. Reverend Dana Owens will moderate the conversation. Reverend R. Lenton Buffalo Jr., Dr. Christopher Michael Jones, Dr. Joanne Noel, and Reverend Margaret Walker Esquire will contribute rich insights around our topic tonight. In the United States, labor movements, reforms, organizations have been in motion since 1855. They have been on the job, watching over the interests of the human nuts and bolts of our nation. But what about us? Treat them well, for without them, our life begins to retreat. Black strength sowed, Black sweat watered, Black ingenuity raised crops of capital gain. Or as Dr. King put it, capitalism was built on the exploitation and suffering of Black slaves and continues to thrive on the exploitation of the poor, both Black and white, both here and abroad. So what do we make of all of this? What do we make of reparations and the politics of Black regret? Let's listen to the insights our panel has to offer. Thanks again for being with us.
Let me say greetings to the St. Paul Baptist Church family. God bless you for joining us for this Village Talk. My name is Reverend Dana Owens, the pastor of Messiah Baptist Church in the city of East Orange, and I will be the moderator for this panel discussion. I am excited because we have some insightful, thought-provoking individuals who are part of our panel that's going to offer their views, their takes regarding reparations and the politics of Black regret. And so without any further ado, I'm going to introduce each person, each panelist, and give them just an opportunity to introduce themselves and their background, and then we'll get into our discussion. I'll start with Dr. Christopher Jones first.
Yes, good morning, Dr. Dana Owens. So good to see you again. And I extend greetings to the illustrious and ineffable Dr. Pastor Bernadette Glover, to the St. Paul's family, and to all of the other colleagues that are on the panel on today. My name is Christopher Michael Jones, Senior Pastor of First Baptist Church of Hillside, located in Hillside, New Jersey. And I am glad to be a part of today's discussion on reparations and the politics of Black regret. Thank you for having me.
Amen. Next, we'll have, let's hear from Reverend Dr. Margaret Walker.
Good morning, right? It's still morning. Good morning. I am so honored to be participating in this panel discussion. It is a very timely one. I want to thank Dr. Glover for the invitation, and I do look forward to just diving into this topic. I am an attorney. I'm an in-house attorney with Xerox Corporation. I do intellectual property work, but I have certainly a desire and a love of civil rights litigation and civil rights law. I'm also an associate minister at St. James Missionary Baptist Church in New Britain, Connecticut, where my husband, Dr. John W. Walker, is the pastor. And so am happy to be a part of this. Thank you.
Amen. Happy to have you. Happy to have you. Reverend Buffalo.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Arlington Buffalo Jr., and I'm the pastor of the Union Baptist Church in Elizabeth. And I want to thank the great doctor for inviting me to be a part of this, so I have a chance to listen into these great minds. God bless you all. Looking forward to a wonderful thing happening today.
Amen. And then lastly, Reverend Noel.
Hi, I'm Dr. Joanne J. Noel. I hold a PhD from Union Institute and University and a DMin from New Brunswick Theological Seminary. My areas of exploration as an academic are the politics of race, gender, sexuality, and religiosity, and justice and anti-racism. I am, as one of my mentors said, just tickle pink, pleased as punch to be part of this illustrious group of intellectuals, academicians, and leaders in the kingdom of God, and look very much to having a rich and relevant conversation around this topic. I want to thank my mentor, Dr. Glover Williams, for affording me this opportunity. Thank you so very much.
Yes, yes. And we do thank, again, the pastor of St. Paul, Reverend Glover, for creating this and for inviting all of us to be a part of this discussion. My job today is just to guide the discussion. And so throughout our time together, panelists, I will ask you individual questions, but then I'll also ask questions for the group as a whole. I would just ask to all of our panelists, be mindful of our time constraints. It's difficult when you are doing this on Zoom because sometimes your thoughts can get carried away and 5 minutes turns to 15. And so my job is just to keep us within the time limits, but then also hear from each of you and get your thoughts and your insights. Let's start it off. So our theme for our discussion is reparations and the politics of Black regret. Let's just start off with reparations, first of all. If I could hear just from each panelist, just give me your views as of today regarding reparations for African Americans in the United States. Dr. Noel, I'll start with you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so very much for the opportunity again. I want to start off by saying that I know the topic of reparations is a controversial issue, especially when it's divided along party lines. And when we look at the positions of the some members of the Republican Party as opposed to the Democratic, and it's even divided along the lines in terms of people of color, whether those people of color are from Afro-Caribbean or African Americans or Africans from the diasporas even. And if you look at the debate around it with people like Coleman Hughes and Ta-Nehisi Coates, you'll see that they hold two very disparate views about reparations. And I want to say that while we cannot in no way compensate for the degradation of Blacks, I believe that reparations might serve to repair in some way the disenfranchisement that plagues some Black communities. But exactly what reparations look like, because it doesn't necessarily have to be money, is quite debatable. Thank you.
Thank you. Reverend Buffalo.
I agree. I think that if we think about reparations as simply monetary terms, I don't think it would for many people make a big difference, because many of us have not been taught how to handle our money. Amen. And so it might not solve any of our issues. It might not bring remedy to our situations, and it might exacerbate them by adding to the regret of having had this money and thrown this money away, sort of like winning the lottery and throwing it away and being worse than you were when you started off. And so I think that we do have to think seriously about what reparations would look like, and whether they would be monetary in some places, or they would be academic in some places, or just what the shape of that would be. And I know that it's a difficult thing, and I'm glad to be here today to hear us talk about this.
Thank you for that. Reverend Walker.
So I wish I could take the opposite and opposing position just for conversation's sake, but I wish I don't think it wouldn't be genuine. I believe reparations are in order, and I haven't always thought that. But seeing sort of what has transpired over the course of the last several years, seeing how, we're smart people, we can figure this thing out. I think it's more than money, but I think it does include money. How that money is dispersed, so that it doesn't become the issue that Reverend Buffalo mentioned. I think we can figure out ways, because until we can really address this wealth gap, and I think we're going to have some issues. And I think it's more than just money, though. I think there's a truth and reconciliation. I think there's a healing that needs to be done. So I think it's much greater than just the monetary, but I think it's time.
Okay. Reverend Jones.
Yeah, I think we can't deny that virtually all of the racial disparities that exist in America today are directly tied to the legacy of institutional slavery, whether that be education, whether that be inadequate housing, whether that be inadequate health care, mass incarceration, the lack of investment capital in our Black and Brown communities. I think the argument has already been made by coalitions like the Coalition of Blacks who are for reparations. They have already made the argument that reparations should be made, and that as a collective people, we should be actively engaged in those processes that bring about justice and reparations for the people that have been harmed by the institution of slavery. And I would also add to that, Pastor Owens, that I think the Bible has taken a definitive stance on matters pertaining to reparations and justice and righteousness. I'm thinking of the Hebrew word misfat, which is used over 400 times in the Old Testament, through which God commands the people of Israel to seek justice. There's another Hebrew word, sudaka, where God commands the people of Israel to live righteously. And those two action verbs create the type of community that implores people to do right by each other. And when people are harmed, to repair the persons or the communities that have been harmed.
Okay. We are off and running. Dr. Walker, let me pose this to you. All of you are in agreement regarding reparations. How we get there, the order in which it is done, that will definitely be discussed and debated for years. But Dr. Walker, you spoke of truth and reconciliation actually prior to reparations. Can you speak more to that and your views of what that looks like?
Certainly. And I want to do a disclaimer. I am a lawyer, but I don't typically use the term doctor. I don't want anybody thinking I'm fronting, for lack of a better word. So, certainly what comes to mind is what we've seen in South Africa. The truth and reconciliation sort of hearings and things like that. But what I was getting at there is, along with trying to right the wrong or adjacent to or in tandem with, and maybe even prior to, there has to be a truth moment in this country. Yeah. This denial that we see is not healthy for anyone. It's something that we've got to come to terms with our history. We've got to stop whitewashing our history. And I think if we do that and we start to really address what did happen, that are just facts that can be proven, and come to terms with that and understand that we've got to get to a place where we've got to somehow make this injustice right. So when I speak of the truth and reconciliation, it's really sort of getting to that point. And then I think at that point, we try to figure out how do we remedy this situation.
Okay.
But as long as we're living, as long as this country or factions within this country are in denial, you know, we're going to continue to be as divisive as we have been.
Okay.
Can I piggyback?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on what Dr. Margaret, I know you made a disclaimer, indicated. And, you know, when I was thinking about reparations, because reparations really means to make amends.
Mhm.
And that's one of the examples of reparations done in South Africa when Desmond Tutu and the Truth and Reconciliation Committee was formed because of the whole notion of Ubuntu and trying to restore, you know, some sense of justice and to help South Africans alleviate the trauma of the commodification and objectification they faced under the apartheid regime. Suddenly they embarked on that Truth and Reconciliation Committee that heard the experiences of and apologies of people who were affected by apartheid. The point I want to make is that, you know, within the United States of America, there have been 2 apologies for racism, I believe, for slavery. I believe in 2008 and 2009, there was an apology and a recognition that, you know, this atrocity was committed against Black and brown bodies in the United States. So I think that there is not a sense that the history that slavery occurred is being negated. But what I heard Mitch McConnell said years ago was that, you know, the fact that it happened bear no repercussions, that the body of Americans who are now alive did not take part. The descendants of those who were slave masters and overseers should not be held culpable for what their ancestors did a long time ago, because their ancestors are no longer alive and they weren't immediately tied to those atrocities. So I think that is what we have to challenge, the notion that individuals, descendants who are benefiting, mind you,
That's the word.
Too loud. I get passionate when I talk about this issue, who are benefiting from the plunder. I think Nahisi Coates call it the plunder of the wealth of Blacks who were brought, kidnapped from different parts of Africa and brought here to be slaves for many hundreds of years. And not only slaves, but even after slavery was abolished, the atrocity of Jim Crow for many, many years, and just the degradation that people of color experience in the United States. And now to say that there is not some sort of reparatory justice that should be disseminated, I think puts the lie on the apologies that we have heard in the past. So again, it's not so much that, they don't recognize that the slavery has taken place and the emancipation, of course, they recognize that, but is distancing themselves from a group of people are now distancing, that's not everybody, but distancing themselves from the whole notion of being held accountable in whatever way, shape, or form that accountability might take shape.
They go further than that, though, because they also say that even though there was slavery, it wasn't as bad as we think it was.
Oh my gosh.
And that because we have slave songs, and because we dance, and because of all those things that happened in our community, that it must not have been as bad as people make it out to be. And so you have this wave of disbelief that's in this country with people who don't believe that slavery was actually the kind of physical, moral, intellectual and spiritual degradation that it was. And to imagine someone else being in this situation and still being able to work with people and to function in a society with people is something that I can't imagine. It's a thing that Black folks have done through the grace of God. I don't want to preach, but that's what it has been.
And I totally agree. I don't mean to take up the whole conversation, but I just want to piggyback on that because, you know, Reverend Lenton pointed to Blacks were singing and dancing, and that somehow gave the impression that we were happy. But people like W.E.B. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass in their books pointed out that singing and dancing was to alleviate the pain and torment of the everyday torture of just being in that particular kind of existence.
It's human inhuman treatment. That's what it is.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to push this conversation a little further because I'm hearing a responsibility and accountability being held by the majority in this country. However, I want to ask, and Reverend Jones, I'll start with you. I want to ask a question. So early on, you spoke of a couple of Hebrew words that are mentioned throughout the Bible, but we also know, especially in the Old Testament, that as the children of Israel were emancipated out of Egypt, I believe stones were set up in the Jordan River, and those stones were a reminder of what God had done for them and where they had come from. Reverend Jones, let me ask you this question. Have we failed as the Black community in telling our history so that reparations or reconciliation isn't a priority for us as a people in this country?
I'm not so thank you for asking the brilliant question, Dr. Owens.
It's not doctor. Let me make my disclaimer. we working on it, but not yet. Go ahead.
I'm not so sure if I would go to the extreme in saying that the Black church has failed. But what I will say is that perhaps the Black church has lost sight of its role in framing the collective memory that we are to hold to as a people of faith, which not only informs what God has brought us from, but it also informs the way that we shape new social structures in the present, if that makes sense. I'm reminded of the great sociologist Jeffrey Olick, and he actually wrote a book that was entitled The Politics of Regret. And he argues in this book that the way that we remember the past, right, informs that we live in society today. And just thinking about that brings me back to Deuteronomy chapter 8, where God calls Israel to remember how God delivered them from Egypt, to remember how God sustained them for 40 years in the wilderness. And the point of remembering is not just to maintain a reverence for our divine healer and deliverer who rescued us from the hands of Pharaoh, but to also inform that we create new communities where people can live wholly and fully. And I believe, to your question, Pastor Owens, I believe that the church does have a role to play in framing the collective memory and historical responsibility of a people who have endured systematic oppression, who have survived institutional slavery, and have been given the opportunity to create a new and just society.
Okay. Anyone else want to add on to that?
One of the things that I agree, certainly, and the church as well as the family. One thing comes to mind sort of anecdotally, and then I also wanted to mention this HR 40, but I've got 3 daughters, and we live in a predominantly white environment. and they go to a predominantly white school.
Mhm.
And it has been incumbent upon my husband and myself to teach our children the facts, because if I were to allow the schools to educate them solely on this issue, they would come home with their heads hung down every day. And with the issues with the self-esteem and all. So one example was, one of my daughters said the teacher pulled her out when they were talking about the little bit that they talk about slavery, where everybody's happy. And it was in part the Africans' fault for selling, all of that nonsense. But I said, she told me the teacher pulled her out to ask her if she's okay with this discussion. And I said, no. Ask her to ask the other students, are they okay? Because you have nothing to be embarrassed about. You've done nothing wrong. There is no reason why you should be feeling the least bit out of place. If anyone should feel bad about what's going on in this conversation, it certainly isn't you.
Right.
So it's starting early to get them grounded, to make them understand, because if not, then they do become part of the problem. Then we don't understand as a people our history. And so we fall for the okie doke each and every time.
Can I just make one point?
Sure. Go right ahead.
Some of you raised up the work of Bishop Desmond Tutu moments ago. I was afforded the opportunity to travel with a cohort of pastors to South Africa with Dr. Lawrence Carter, the dean of the Morehouse Chapel. And we sat with Bishop Desmond Tutu. And what he shared with us, and I'll never forget this, he said, it doesn't matter how much you inform your people. Reparations will not happen until your country as a whole participates in a season of national lament. Until the entire country participates in a season of national lament, you will never be able to receive the measure of reparations that you truly deserve.
That's profound. So let's push with that. To lament means to mourn. In our communities. Let's start with our community. In our communities, would we say that we even have the pulse of lamenting? Are we even considering lamenting the past when there's so much happening in our present day community that we've been lamenting since we've arrived? So there's an argument, and I'm just being the advocate. I'm on the other side. Why are we lamenting the past, Reverend Jones, Reverend Buffalo, Reverend Noel, Reverend Walker, when we've got bodies in our streets, when we have crime, when we have economic disparity? Why keep focusing on the past? I'm just throwing that out there.
Because
go ahead.
To understand why we have what we currently have today, you've got to understand how we got here.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with Dr. Margaret. I mean, a group of people who don't understand their history of the past would not understand how to move forward. And we don't understand the trauma. First we got to deal with it. Yes, there are issues that are currently occurring that needs our immediate attention. But a lot of those issues, have derived, they're derivatives, they're sediments from generational trauma, from the generational atrocities committed against Black and Brown people that has disenfranchised them. When you look at the statistics, I mean, only 8%, the 2019 statistics from CNBC show that only 8% of Blacks have received an inheritance from parents, as opposed to 26%. Only 47% of Blacks own their own homes. And we know that home ownership is one of the factors that lead to generational wealth, that perpetuates wealth going forward. So
Yeah.
when we only have 47% of Blacks owning their own homes as opposed to 76%, all of that is because of the systematic injustices committed against Blacks in the United States.
Can I offer a case study?
Sure.
So my alma mater, Princeton Theological Seminary, I'm sure many of you heard about this this
Yeah.
2-year study
Yeah.
that they initiated, a 2-year study to investigate their historical ties to slavery.
Right.
And what they found out at the end of the study is that prior to the Civil War, 15% of their entire endowment came from the
Sale and ownership.
sale of human bodies.
Right.
And 45% of their donors were slaveholders.
Owners. Yep.
And so it was because of their revisiting of the past that they were able to come to a formula, an inadequate formula, I should say, which allowed for them to engage in the act of reparations. So they agreed to give $27 million in the form of reparations to African American students who applied to Princeton Seminary. And the Black Seminarian Association on campus, they raised the question, is this really a just form of reparations when you have over $1 billion in
Right.
your endowment?
Right.
So the point I want to make is remembrance is key.
Yes.
Because it allows for you to understand fully the degree that you've been treated unjustly, and then to assess how the harm can be repaired in a full and thoughtful way. So remembrance is key.
I also,
Reverend Buffalo, I want to hear from Reverend Buffalo. He hasn't spoken in this.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Reverend Buffalo.
I'm just
Yes.
saying, I had to get that brother, and sit down with him because he's sparking things in me. This whole idea of reparations being the child of parentage that is thoughtful and full and a real expression of what really happened. That reparations have to come, as he said, after we have fully understood the depth of the hurt.
Yeah.
And once we understand the depth of the hurt, then we can begin to measure that hurt.
Yes.
And then once we can measure that hurt, then we can make an assessment of what that hurt cost today, not what it was back then, but what the final cost of that hurt is. And that Princeton study is a marvelous study because you say, wow, all those millions of dollars, but those millions of dollars mean nothing compared to the billions that they have.
That's
and it's not 15%, it's not 40%.
That's right.
It's 3%.
That's right.
And so no matter that they get into $27 million, it still does not repair the hurt.
No.
And so it is not really reparations. It's a down payment on reparations.
Correct.
It's like folk in the church who come on Sunday morning and give an offering. And they say, well, I'm tithing. No, you're not. You're giving a down payment on your tithe. You're not tithing.
Come on now. Come on.
And so it's the same. And then once we do that, then we wonder why there's no satisfaction.
Yeah.
And why this problem doesn't go away.
Right.
It doesn't go away because all you did was pull the scab off of an old issue, and you've given me nothing to treat it with.
That's absolutely right.
So
I think.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that's the brilliance of this HR 40 bill,
right?
And the brilliance of John Conyers, because what he's asking for is for a commission to study and develop a reparations proposal, because I think he realizes that we need to really, you say, remove the scab. We need to really study what slavery did, what all of the aftermath of slavery did. I mean, it's profound.
Right.
And it's compounded one on another. And until you can, as you said, sir, until you can fully assess the impact and the implications and the repercussions
Yeah.
fully. I mean,
Yeah.
it's layers deep.
Yeah.
So the fact that he's calling for, he's not saying pay us, not right now. He's saying, because he's setting his stage, he's setting the argument. Let's study this first. Let's come to a joint realization and understanding of what the institution of slavery was, and that slavery flourished, and how America became America, and how, you know, slavery is what made Cotton King, and Cotton King is what made America what America was, and how it made, you know, the preeminence even in the world at that time. I mean, don't give me $27 million. We, you know, that's not even scratching the surface.
And to your point, we can't fully lament until we ascertain the depth of our hurt.
That's correct. That's it. That's it.
Here's my question. Reverend Noel, I'm going to give you a moment. You were going to share something earlier, or?
No, go ahead. I'm good.
Okay. So my question is twofold. One is, we understand and we are in agreement of reparations. However, as we look at our community, and I'm just looking at you all on the panel, such a diverse group, coming from different walks of life with education.
Yeah.
If it's difficult for us, and this is a 5-person group, to come to an understanding on reparations, how will we ever, I'll say that, will we ever reach a consensus of this is enough? I go back to Princeton and you, Jones, Reverend Jones, because for someone to say 27 million is just a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
It is.
Correct. However, is there any credence, is there any kudos given to Princeton for the work that was done and for the amount that was given? Because the argument is going to be, and I hear it coming from the right, is that when will it be enough? When will it?
It will never be enough.
Okay, there you have it.
You killed my mother, you killed my grandmother, you did terrible and horrible things. You can never give enough money to make that right.
So how do we reach some kind of?
But there can be the real part of this for me is not the monetary part of it.
Okay.
The real part of this to me is the soul part of it.
Yeah.
How do I get my soul right with what you've done to me?
Can you elaborate? Can you elaborate on that, Rev?
But I just mean that there has to be in that great apology, there has to be some sincerity.
Yeah.
And there has to be an admission that it was inhuman, that it was an inhuman act perpetrated against human beings, the depth of which can never be fully plumbed. We will never know the full impact of slavery on our people. We will never know that.
Yeah.
And the great lament is that even we who were the great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren of slaves, even we don't know the depths of it. We just know that it has impacted our lives and continues to impact our lives, but we don't know the depth of it because we've not been as brother said, we've not been allowed to lament over it. We've not been allowed to go into ourselves and to open ourselves to each other, let alone to the other.
I agree with Reverend Linton, but I think it's not only slavery.
That's right.
So my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents were brought from somewhere in Africa, whether it was Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Senegal, wherever, and shipped to the islands. So some of my ancestors were dropped off in the United States, different parts probably of South America, and the islands to work the sugar plantation, the cotton fields. Slavery was abolished in the islands in around 1833, around there. In the United States, 1865. But what followed slavery in the United States, this is where the Caribbean and the United States, disparate and separate. because it was 250 years plus of slavery, as Ta-Nehisi Coates pointed out, 90 years of Jim Crow.
Yeah.
In the Caribbean, we did not experience that Jim Crow. But that debilitation of a person's dignity and self-worth that created what Dubois called that double consciousness, that what African-American writers called is that systematic beating of who they are as human beings, you know, that perpetuated the literature of people like Langston Hughes,
Yeah.
you know, that perpetuated literature of people like Nella Larson, so on and so forth, right? 90 years plus of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate but equal laws, and 35 years plus of racist housing policy.
Yeah.
You know, that was meant to, you know, so the African American was plundered through slavery, but a systematic plundering and negation occurred of his or her personhood. So it's more than just the slavery. It's what occurred that created, you know, that continue to create that trauma, you know, as if to totally annihilate the existence of Blacks. And Blacks were even told, you know, and I know I'm going into history, maybe I'm digressing a bit, we want to send you back to Africa.
Yeah.
Because, you know, white plantation owners wanted nothing to do with Blacks after they were free. And mind you, they were given reparation. Black slave owners were given reparation for giving up their, allowing their slaves to go free.
They were.
And the fact that we are saying now that, and it was monetary, mind you. You know, and America also paid reparations, monetary reparations to the Japanese when they were interned. You know? So the fact that some people are saying, well, you know, the people who committed these atrocities are no longer alive and we're no longer responsible, you know, to me, that continues to demean the personhood of people of color even more.
Because their beneficiaries are still alive.
Yes,
right. And that's why that study.
Yes. And I agree with reparations. I'm going to yield the floor. I'm going to yield the floor. This is because of my 4-hour lecturing. I'm sorry.
That's why to really study this is really hitting the nail on the head, because it's not like it's over. Now let's account for what we've done wrong.
Yes.
And to your point, you know, when will it be enough? It really, there's not an end point. But if we can get to a point where we fully understand and stop misunderstanding, I mean, which goes even with our own community as well as the other community, maybe we can start lessening as we learn and recognize and stop attributing this to some kind of inherent defect.
Right.
Really acknowledge the causes of why we are where we are. Maybe then we can start emerging at some point for a better tomorrow. So it is a never end. It's not a thing that's going to end. This is going to be a continuation.
It's a linear issue.
Yes.
Okay.
It's more than money. I agree with Dr. Margaret and Rev. It's more than just money. Yes.
So there is a conservative thought in our community that says we are wasting our time asking them to do something that they'll never do.
Right.
Instead, rather we should come together collectively as a community and become the force that we already are. The argument is there's so much work that we could do as a whole in our community. Why spend our time asking for something from someone who hasn't given it and will never give it? What do we say to those individuals?
You know, I don't agree with the never.
Okay.
I don't agree with the never, because we see pockets. We see states making some acknowledgements. We see universities making some acknowledgements and attempting to make some kind of restitution, albeit not enough. But we're seeing this in pockets. We have President Biden, who agrees that there needs to be some kind of way to address it. We have the progress that this HR 40 bill has made, which is more than it's made in the 30 years since Conyers first tried to introduce it. So there is progress on this front. It may not be as quickly as we want it to be or as fully, but I see enough to be hopeful that we may get somewhere here. And we have gotten somewhere here. Look at the Jesuits, right? So maybe it wouldn't be the government at large, but maybe pockets. And then eventually move into something greater.
Okay.
Reverend Dana, I don't espouse the either or philosophy.
Okay.
You know, why do we always have to have a binary either or? What about and also? Why can't we continue to pursue and grow as a community and also, you know, keep engaging in the discourse about reparations?
And as we grow as a community, we become stronger and we're able to demand more because of our unity. So it's not an either or, it's a both and.
Okay. Would we say that our communities are unified?
No.
Why?
Say that too fast.
And because in what I'm hearing throughout our discussion is there is a connection with our broken communities, our fractured communities, and the atrocities that have taken place in the past. I believe we can make that connection. Yes.
Yes.
And if so, then how do we then move to heal then our communities?
So I would suggest, speaking from the perspective of a pastor and an academician, that we have to be intentional about creating coalitions that can speak broadly enough to
include
the plethora of concerns that exist in all of our communities, because we are not a monolithic people.
Right.
Absolutely.
My mind takes me back, Pastor Owens, to John chapter 10, verse 10, where Jesus says, he gathered his disciples and he said that the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy, but I've come to bring life, right? So that you can have it more abundantly. And Jesus, he uses this Greek word zoe for life. And it means to be restored, mind, body, and soul.
Yeah.
And I don't think one individual or just one group of people can speak to the needs of the mind, the body, and the soul. I think it's going to take a collective effort, much in the way that we're engaging with one another intellectually on this platform this morning. I think if we as a collective people can create the types of coalitions that speak to the inadequacies in education, that speak to the inadequacies in housing and voting rights and mass incarceration and healthcare. I love the point that Dr. Knoll made, that it's not just slavery that has decimated us as a people. It's everything that's come after that.
Yeah.
I mean, we could spend an hour just speaking on how the New Deal laws, how that piece of legislation excluded us, and set us back another 150 years. So it's going to take a collective effort.
Let's talk about to become whole, build our neighborhoods. Yeah, all those things. You're right. Absolutely right.
And with this bill again, we do have a coalition. We've got National African American Reparations Commission, National Coalition of Blacks for Reparation, Human Rights Watch, ACLU. We've got George Takei, who I think was he on Star Trek?
Was he Star Trek? Yeah.
So it is. I agree wholly. It is going to be a coalition of people who do understand or have a deeper understanding and willing to work together on this common cause. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful.
And by the way, what we fail to miss is that when Jesus said that he came for us to live life, to have it more abundantly, he made that claim in the face of the Roman Empire. So it was his understanding that we could obtain that sense of wholeness and abundant life, even in the face of an empire that has oppressed us as a people.
Yes. I want to, Reverend Jones, thank you for leading us to the Word of God. Since all of you are connected to the church in some capacity, let's shift our conversation. We've sort of focused in on the majority. We focused in on our community and our responsibilities. Let's focus in on the church. And we touched upon it earlier, but let's delve a little deeper as we look at what the Black church, and I'm just going to use that term loosely, but as we look at the Black church, is there a level of accountability that the Black church should have in pushing this agenda? If so, then what? Because, and I'm only saying this because from my studies, the Black church and its agenda has changed throughout the last, I'd say 20, 25 years. It has become, this is just my humble opinion, we've become more isolated. That, as you said earlier, Reverend Jones, that our membership is no longer, we're not a monolithic people, meaning even in the communities in which we pastor, quite possibly we see our members coming from different communities rather than coming from the neighborhood. So as the Black church has shifted, what should the responsibility be from clergy, from lay persons in our churches to push this agenda?
I'd like to speak to that first, Pastor.
I want to hear from everyone too. So Jones, you'll start us off.
Yeah, so you raise a great question. And that question is, who is our neighbor? Who is our neighbor?
Jones, you're going to take a text before this is over with. I feel like, go ahead.
You already did. You missed it.
You must have been a point guard because you've given up the perfect alley-oops.
It's the assist.
So I think that every congregation, every faith leader must wrestle with the question, who is our neighbor? One of the ways that our church has tried to model what it means to be a good neighbor to the persons outside of the four walls of the church who live in the local community. One of the things that we did, this is prior to the onset of the pandemic, is that we would choose one Black or Brown owned company in our county once a month. And we would invest up to $3,500 in that company. And the reason why we did that, we call it the Love Mob movement. And it's been covered by media on several occasions. And the reason why we've done that is because we believe that if a church is going to be a good neighbor, then it has to invest in those persons, in those institutions, and those associations that exist outside the four walls of the church as much as the church invests in its own members. Because brown people, Black people, people of color, they're not receiving financial support from banking institutions in the way that other people groups are. And I believe that the church has a role to play in supporting those underserved communities so that they can be economically empowered. That's just one way that we've approached answering the question, who is our neighbor?
Thank you for that. Reverend Walker, I'm gonna have everyone share with this. Go ahead.
You know, you mentioned the sort of changing demographics of the church. And what I say to that is the message of Jesus hasn't changed. And the call for justice, the call for some of the things that Dr. Jones spoke of earlier, that hasn't changed. That's become even more vital today. So I think the church, we need to stop being silent or stop talking amongst ourselves and really get out there. I mean, why is it every time a news outlet goes to the religious community, they go to these these white evangelists? Where are, where's the president of the National Baptist Convention and the AME? Where's our voice? We need to call out. If we simply just call out wrong, if we simply just call out the injustice that we see. I'm reminded of, I think it was it the letter from a Birmingham jail where Dr. King wrote to his white fellow clergy.
Yes.
That's what we need to do. We need to stop. We need to just speak up. Wrong is wrong, right is right. Preach Jesus. I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
All right. Dr. Noel.
I agree with my fellow panelists. Thank you so very much for sharing your perspectives. But I do wonder though if there's a crisis of leadership and I know the Black church is not a monolith. Black churches, is there a crisis of leadership? I remember the civil rights movement when Dr. Martin Luther King was placed up front, you know, and managed to move, and he was not without his warts, as we know, and managed to move an entire nation to the Civil Rights Act. I believe that some, not all, because we're not a monolith, we're not monolithic as a Black church or Black churches, but I do believe that some Black churches have lost that prophetic impetus and they've become very pastoral, more internal instead of external. There's not that external thrust. They see a dichotomy between how the church functions in terms of its spiritual formation and creating of the discipleship, and not how it should be functioning in the world. But if, as Dr. Christopher Jones points out, that the question to be asked is, who's my neighbor? Then that question suggests that the church ought to move beyond its narcissistic, incestuous self and really deal with the issues of the community in which it's placed and the larger community.
Dr. Noel, you're swinging hard this morning. You're swinging hard. Go ahead.
I think it was Eddie Glaudy who said years ago, who brought an indictment against the Black church that it had lost its social power and impetus. And I think this is a good time for the Black churches to gather around this issue of reparations and finding our common ground and working together to ensure that some sort of reparation occurs for the well-being of the generation now and the generation to come.
And Dr. Noel, to add to your point, if it is the case that the data suggest that our Black women are the most educated and the most prepared in the workforce today, the Black church has to do a much better job of empowering and inviting our women to take center stage, to add their voice to these issues that the Black church, which historically has been very patriarchal, to allow for the church to speak to these issues and effectively resolve these issues in a more cohesive and inclusive way. I must say that.
I totally agree with you, Dr. Jones. You have no pushback from me on that. In fact, it was Katie Cannon who pointed out that a woman's role in the church, for moving the church from the uplift movement to supporting pastors, to ensuring that the church maintain that vital social thrust. Always it has been the woman, right? Who was it who wrote, if it weren't for the woman, her name is escaping me now, but she does a fabulous job also of highlighting the role of Black women in carrying the Black church. But yet, and I know we're probably going into different waters, yet the Black woman's voice have been excluded from the table when decisions that are made, where vital decisions are being made, excluded from leadership of the church, not just in terms of patriarchy, but that internalization of patriarchy by women also in the church. So we do have a lot of work to do.
Reverend Buffalo, I want to give you a chance to speak on that. And could you just share, Reverend Buffalo, let me ask you, because I think you're the senior pastor on our call this morning. So share how long you've been pastoring, and then the shift that you've seen in terms of what we call the Black church.
So you just kindly called me the old man.
I didn't. Seasoned. It's seasoned. It's seasoned. Like a fine wine. That's what it is.
There you go.
Before I came on here today. I can't. I think what I want to say is that all that has been said is certainly true. That if the women in my church went on strike, there would be no church.
That's true.
If the women in my church said it's going to be our way or the highway, it would be the highway for us, because it has been that women have been the support and the bulwark of the church, and have not gotten just credit for that. I think part of that, I'm not excusing it, but I think part of that was that they saw the structures in our country as being patriarchal, and they knew that they needed to put a man in the front in order for the case to be heard. But the sadness of it is that the men who were quote unquote put in the front oftentimes forgot who put them there, and didn't go back to check with home to see what ought to be the new agenda. And so
well said.
You know, and so I think that it needs to be acknowledged over again that that Black churches, not the Black church, but Black churches, are the purview of Black women, and they are what they are because of the struggle of Black women over all these centuries to have this place. Now, what I thought we could talk about or look at is that the Black church is a place where focus can be found.
Yeah,
and it's not binary. Again, it's not an either or. It's not pastoral or prophetic. It's both. That the Black pastor has always been forced to be prophetic.
Yes.
We may have wanted to be pastoral because the pastoral is easy. You preach a funeral, you do a wedding, you do some counseling. That the pastoral stuff is easy, but the prophetic stuff is where the hurt is, and where the pain is, and where the suffering is, and no normal person runs to pain and suffering.
No.
But and that's why the call into ministry is a crazy call. When you call somebody, okay, you have a decent life and things are going to go fairly well for you, but come over here and do this, where they're not going to appreciate what you do, and they're not going to care about what you say half the time. They're not going to listen to you. You can't tell them what to do, or you can do suggest. Do this, and there'll be a reward later on. That's a crazy call. But I answered it, and so have others. And I think that the important thing is that the church is a place of focus, and so you get that prophetic focus. I'm not prophetic every Sunday, but I'm prophetic on some Sundays. I'm not pastoral every Sunday, but I'm pastoral on some Sundays.
That's good.
And through the week, I have to put both caps on. And I think that's what the church has to do. The Black churches have to be prophetic and pastoral. You can't be prophetic in a community and not see people who are hungry or thirsty or in jail and not do something about it.
That's right.
And so Christ calls us to be prophetic and pastoral. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the church that's pastoral. Because for everyone that's pastoral, there's another one that's prophetic. So if your main thing is prophecy, if the persons at the head of your church are pushing a prophetic movement, then people who are for the prophetic movement are going to be a part of that church.
That's right.
Other people who are wounded, who need pastoral care, are going to go someplace else.
That's right.
And then there's that church in the middle that's trying to do a little bit of both. We're going to have a mix of people, but church is those things. That's the church. And because we're not the Black church, but Black churches, and even within denominations, you can't say the AME church, because there are AME churches, because there's some that are prophetic and there's some that are pastoral in their natures. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so,
Pastor, you are so right. And I just want to add, and we need to, as clergy, and I'm sure Pastor Owens, you can relate to this, we need to stop condemning one another.
Oh yeah.
No matter if we lean more towards the prophetic or the pastoral, as long as you are being truthful to your context
and your gift,
God gets the glory.
Yeah.
We've got to stop tearing each other down.
And
get back to building one another up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amen.
And I do want to agree with that, that there has to be that balance, that measure. And if one church is more pastoral and has less prophetic, that's, you know, as long as that's the calling of the church, fine. But I do think that the church cannot, we are at a time where we just cannot hide our heads in the sand and say
Correct.
that's those people's problems. You know?
Correct.
Yeah, and I
Absolutely.
wouldn't suggest that pastoral churches, that pastoral ministries do that. I think that pastoral
No,
ministries.
I'm not suggesting that at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But please finish your thoughts, sir. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just thinking that I thought that you were intimating that you know, sticking your head in the sand has to do with being more pastoral and prophetic, because prophetic people stick their heads up and get them cut off. You know, but I think that it's important for us to see the value of pastoral ministry, of real Christ-centered pastoral ministry in a world where people are hurting and don't know where else to go to get help. And if that church is focused on helping whoever those people may be, that Christ is there. He's there and active.
Long run is that the church, we just have to be more like Jesus. We just have to embody Jesus.
Yeah, because he was both.
And exactly, fully illustrated both. Yeah.
He was.
So to all of our panelists, we are nearing the end of this lively and informative discussion. I want to pose to all of you two questions. I'm always big on takeaways and plans of action, because I think many of us can agree we've been a part of discussions that were just simply that, discussions. And so to all of our panelists, two questions. One is, based upon our discussion, what will you do? What will you do personally to further enhance this discussion, this moving of the needle, this needle of reparations in our country? That's one. What will you do? And then secondly, because we do have an audience who's watching, what will you challenge the audience to do? What can the person who's just working, trying to make ends meet, how can they be a part of this discussion and a part of this plan? Because oftentimes it seems as though it's these discussions and ideas are pushed towards either clergy or those in academia, but the common person, and we're all common, so I don't want to make sure, you know, there's no highs or lows, but we're all on the same journey together. But what will you challenge those who are watching? What can they do to be a part of this process, so that we can get to where we're trying to get to? So one, what will you do? Two, what can the audience do? I will start with Dr. Noel.
Thank you so very much. So those are really two very poignant questions. So as an academician, I always try to use my context to empower. To me, that's what leadership is about, empowering others to be the fullest and highest potential that God created them to be. So I always want to include whatever I think is beneficial for the growth of my students in terms of who they are spiritually, intellectually, socially in the curriculum. So I would definitely want to include more issues of justice, specifically pointing to the HR 40 bill in my curriculum. I did design a course called African American Literature, precisely for the purpose, Reverend Owens, because precisely for the purpose of educating students in whatever ethnic group about African American history, because I thought as an academician that there was not enough courses that inform students about the history of our past, etc. And so most students came to class not even knowing. I've encountered a whole lot of students who did not even know some of the things that we have talked about in African American history. So I'd want to include it in my curriculum as a means of empowering my students to think about issues of justice, issues of oppression, etc., so that they become more productive, contributing citizens of the United States. They develop more conscientization about who they are, about empathy, intercultural sensitivity, but other groups of people, and have an appreciation for the history of others, and a history that's not, well, it is centered in Eurocentric ideology, but a history about other people besides dead white men. I would encourage our listening audience, and thank you so very much for being with us. I would encourage our listening audience to call your representative, support the HR 40 bill, and tell the story. You know, one of the panelists, I don't remember if it was Dr. Jones, talks about people are not telling the story, right? And you use the biblical text to ground that truth in. Tell the story about the historical past and about our people. Help our people, help your children to remember. Tell it around. My Bishop Donald Healy always said, tell it around the dinner table. Let the dinner table become, again, what it used to be, that place that centers the family, because good families build good communities. So tell the story and keep telling the story. Don't forget the story, because a nation of people who forget their story forgets their past, and then you don't know where you're going in the future. And then talk about issues of justice. You know, form groups of individuals who will talk about what it means, what reparation would mean, what it would look like. You know, I recently read a report that says that if the United States of America has to reimburse people of color, Blacks, for the degradation faced by the ancestors, it would amount to, I think it was 20 trillion was the last I heard, right? But as we have been saying, reparation is not necessarily just money, because there's no amount of money that can be paid for the plunder of Black bodies in the United States. So that's what I would do. Those are my takeaways. Thank you so much for very much for the question.
Thank you, Dr. Noel. Reverend Buffalo.
I'm going to yield the floor to Dr. Noel. She took my time.
We got time, Rev. We got
sorry.
time. We got time.
So I apologize, sir.
I gave her my 5 minutes. But I do think that for me, the takeaway is to keep preaching Jesus, because in him there is life, and it's not just those words, but it is the word that in him there is life, and because of that, he will cause us to ally ourselves with causes that are important. This is an important cause, and so I think that what I would encourage others to do is to do what was mentioned earlier, to be a part of a coalition of people who are working at this problem, because individually we can't do anything about it, but as coalitions, building power is the thing to do, because nothing happens in this country without power. I was in a group that went to the president, the real president, went to President Obama, and we were asking him to do some things in the nation, and he said he listened to us carefully, and when we got finished, he said, "Okay, make me do it." And that was his feeling, that if it was important to us, we would build coalitions and force him to do it. And so the coalition thing, I think, is critical, and recognizing the fact that power is an important thing. When Jesus was leaving, he said, "You shall have power." That he encourages us that that we won't be left alone and won't be left powerless. That we will have power. And so I'm not feeling any sense of being thwarted, and I believe that we shall in fact overcome. And that overcoming happens through coalition building, through the proper use of power, and through prayer. Let me add that, because I think that we've come this far by praying and by working and by power and by coalition. All those things brought us to where we are right now, and I think it will carry us forward.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Reverend Walker.
I'll be quick. What will I do to move the needle? Be more intentional, use the gifts I have. I said I'm a corporate attorney, but that skill set can be used in other avenues to help So just being more intentional. I like the preach Jesus, preaching boldly. And so from my perspective, and then what would I tell our audience? Just educate yourselves. Know your history. And if you don't know your history, because there hasn't been a tradition of it being passed down, go to your grandmothers, go to your great-grandmothers, hear their stories, read, understand your history, understand your worth and your value. Yeah. And I think if we can do that, and if we can instill that in our grandchildren and in our children, we will see a change. So if I had anything, I would encourage you to learn who you are. Also, as my husband says, whose you are, but really to know your history. And don't be embarrassed if you don't know it. There are all kinds of resources and books out there. I saw Black History for Dummies. Know your history, but and that's right. And talk to the elders in your family. Hear their stories, what they've gone through, because you're not here just by happenstance. The fact that you are here today and these here times, that's
Amen. Amen. Reverend Jones.
Yeah, and I would say for me personally, as a pastor, I endeavor to continue to encourage our congregation to live out our mission, which is reach the city for Jesus Christ, one family, one heart, one soul, one mind at a time. That focus is inspired by Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20. It would include economic empowerment, the proclamation of the gospel, and embodying the presence of Jesus Christ, both within the life of the congregation and most certainly outside the walls of the church. As an academician, I endeavor to encourage and empower my students to embrace fully what it means to be a leader and a disciple of Jesus Christ within the context of pastoral ministry, and to understand that with that calling comes a responsibility to be an informed liberator of both the mind, the body, and the soul. And to those who are streaming into this powerful platform, I would say to be intentional about forming relationships with those coalitions that are actually doing the work, because there are a lot of coalitions out there. Some of them are not doing the work, but form relationships with those coalitions that are actually doing the work of participating in the restructuring of a more just society. That's actively engaged in the work of securing reparations for a historical people who have been treated so unjustly. Form relationships with those coalitions who are actually doing the work of recovering history. Amen. Recovering history, because we cannot know where we're going until we understand where we've come from.
That's it.
Thank you so much. St. Paul, we want to thank you for tuning in to this Village Talk. And I just want to give a virtual hand of praise for all of our panelists for taking time out of their schedules to bless all of us and for sharing their wealth of information. Again, this is just a discussion, but we want to be proactive. And I think that they have given us ideas on how to move forward so that we might be able to bring healing and hope to our community. So God bless all of you. Again, panelists, we thank you. I'm just going to give one suggestion if I can, Reverend Glover. I know you're on, but if we could have Dr. Noel, if you could come up with just a small list of things that we could read for our audience, and any other panelists, if we could just come up with a reading, right, just a list to help get us started. I know there's so much, you all quoted so many authors this morning. And so if there's anything that you are reading that could help inform our audience, I think we could at least compile a reading list so people could take this conversation and information just a little bit further. But God bless all of you and your ministries and your work. And we look forward to Village Talk Part 2. Until then, God bless you, St. Paul and friends of St. Paul. And we'll see you real soon. Amen.